began the show by talking about the relative and rather bizarre lack of panic among some on the left in the wake of Trump's barrage of executive orders. But there is one area where the panic has been much more obvious and more to the scale of what you'd expect. And that relates to the Trump administration's efforts to fulfill one of his central campaign promises, which is to deport illegal aliens who are currently residing in the United States and to prevent more illegal aliens from entering into the United States. In particular, Republicans in Congress have just passed the Laken Riley Act with the support of dozens of Democrats. The point of the law is to require the Department of Homeland Security detain illegal aliens who commit crimes, including shoplifting, burglary, larceny, and so on, so that they can be deported immediately. As you may remember, Laken Riley's killer was picked up for a variety of crimes, including shoplifting, before he went hunting for women to rape and murder at the campus of the University of Georgia. But instead of being deported or detained, he was immediately set free, which is what enabled him to commit this horrific crime. So this is about as basic a law as you can imagine. It doesn't even give any new authority to federal immigration officials. Instead, it simply mandates that they do what was already their job when an illegal alien commits a crime. If anything, the law is too permissive. We should be requiring that federal authorities deport everyone who's here illegally, regardless of whether they commit an additional crime or not. But as it stands, it's just a baseline measure to ensure that no more women like Laken Riley are murdered by people who obviously should have been deported a long time ago. But Democrats don't see it that way. In fact, they've been having full-blown meltdowns in Congress over this legislation and Donald Trump's plans more generally with immigration. So here, for example, is the astute scholar Rashida Tlaib.
Enough is enough. It will separate families. It would lead again to continued discrimination. It's shameful that my colleagues are giving into racist fear-mongering at the first opportunity to pass legislation to scapegoat our immigrant neighbors and fuel hate in our communities. I know what's going to happen. It won't just be undocumented. It'll be people like my mother who will get stopped and profiled. She have to carry her U.S. passport around? Are we asking people now to have documentation? That's what you want to turn our neighborhoods into, is militarization?
I yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I just ask all of you to truly understand what this will do to our communities. I urge our colleagues to please vote no on this divisive bill. And it's so important to understand what you're going to turn our communities and our neighborhoods into. We can't allow that to continue to happen. With that, I yield.
So bizarrely, she claims that her mother will be affected by this law, even though her mother apparently is not an illegal alien. And that raises an obvious question. Is Rashida Tlaib's mother a shoplifter? I mean, that's the only way this complaint really makes sense. The law doesn't establish any criteria to profile anyone. It just requires that illegal aliens who commit crimes get detained. Quoting from the legislation, the Secretary of Homeland Security shall issue a detainer for an for an alien described in paragraph 1E, and if the alien is not otherwise detained by federal, state, or local officials, shall effectively and expeditiously take custody of the alien. And if you scroll down up to paragraph 1E, it applies to illegal aliens who are, quote, charged with, arrested for, convicted of, admits having committed, or admits committing acts which constitute the essential elements of any burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting offenses. So maybe Rashida Tlaib is trying to tell us something about her mother and her community. Maybe this is a cry for help. I don't know. Otherwise, it's all very confusing. Fortunately, we have AOC to shed some light on the matter. Here's her very well-reasoned objection to the legislation. Listen.
If someone wants to point a finger and accuse someone of shoplifting, they will be rounded up and put into a private detention camp and sent out for deportation without a day in court, without a moment to assert their right and without a moment to assert the privilege of innocent until proven guilty. Without being found guilty of a crime, they will be rounded up.
Again, this is all nonsense. There's no provision in the legislation where you get rounded up and put into a private detention camp and sent out for deportation as soon as someone, quote, points a finger and accuses you of shoplifting. That's not in there at all. I mean, she's missing two important things. First of all, the law doesn't apply to you unless you're already in this country illegally, meaning you're already subject to immediate deportation. And secondly, random people can't just point a finger at these aliens. They have to be, at a minimum, charged by a prosecutor with an additional crime on top of being here illegally. A lot of Democrats seem to struggle with understanding any of this. Over at CNN, for example, anchor Dana Bash was visibly stunned when Tom Homan explained that all illegal aliens are subject to deportation, even if they haven't committed an additional crime within our borders. Watch.
We're not going to strike, and this is a difference between the last administration and this administration. ICE is going to enforce the immigration law. There's nothing in the INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, says you got to be convicted of a serious crime in order to be removed from this country. So there's going to be more collateral arrests in sanctuary cities because they forced us to go in the community and find the guy we're looking for.
Let me just make sure that I understand what you're saying, because at first you said that the first targets are those with criminal records, but you are also saying that those who are undocumented in the U.S., also who don't have criminal records, people who are working in their communities, maybe even have spouses who are American citizens, they could be swept up with ICE today as well?
What I'm telling you is when we go find our priority target, which is a criminal alien, if he's with others in the United States illegally, we're going to take enforcement action against him. We're going to enforce the immigration law.
One of the things that's great about Tom Homan is that he doesn't even pretend to care about sanitizing any of this. It's what he's been promising to do for months, and he's going to do it. Voters clearly want him to do it. They've got the mandate of the American people. So when the CNN anchor reacts with disbelief, he just doesn't care. That's not going to stop the rest of the corporate press from relying on predictable emotional blackmail. Over the Washington Post, a reporter just uploaded a video of a sobbing foreign national, and her caption reads, quote, "Migrants who are waiting for their 1 p.m. CBP-1 parole appointment learned 20 minutes ago that the app is shut down and those appointments are no longer valid." And here's the video that the reporter posted along with it. There's going to be a lot of this kind of thing in the coming days. There's already been quite a bit of it, these videos of so-called migrants sobbing and crying. But, this one is interesting. First of all, this person's pretty well dressed. She has an iPhone, apparently, because she's checking the app, and clearly not very good at planning ahead because she somehow didn't make the trip at any point in the last 2 months when it was obvious to everyone that Donald Trump was going to take over the White House. But despite all that, we're supposed to feel terrible that she's being turned away. In fact, we're supposed to be willing to forfeit our own sovereignty just so that this woman feels better. If somebody cries because they can't illegally access your home, you should just let them in. I mean, that's the idea. Never mind the inherent incoherence of the left's position on this. I mean, on one hand, they tell us that America is systemically racist, and now it's being run by a fascist dictator. And on the other hand, they expect us to see it as a great tragedy that a Hispanic woman isn't allowed to come here. But by their logic, aren't we doing the woman a favor? Isn't she better off in her homeland? Shouldn't they be the ones on the border saying, no, don't come here, turn back, save yourselves? Right? We should try to save her from our racist, xenophobic, fascist, Nazi hellscape of a country. Now, for their part, Axios came up with another tactic. They decided that they were going to try to use Americans' faith against us. They reported, quote, "Trump's flurry of orders restricting immigration and promising mass deportations violates core Christian principles of caring for the poor and needy." So now the corporate press is reporting on God's assessment of America's domestic policy. They're channeling divine insight, and that insight just so happens to sound a lot like, that fake bishop from the other day. It also contradicts everything that the press has been saying for months. As Aaron McIntyre pointed out, these same media outlets told us that Donald Trump was a Christian nationalist who wants to bring about a Christian theocracy. And now they're mad that Trump is supposedly ignoring Christian law, Christian principles, just to ruin the lives of all these innocent illegal aliens. It's like, which is it? And never mind the fact that there's nothing remotely Christian about allowing your country to be overrun by violent criminals to the point that women and children are routinely dying horrific deaths. There's also nothing in Scripture that tells us that countries shouldn't have borders or that national sovereignty is an inherent evil. There is nothing that declares our right to break whatever law we don't agree with. In fact, Scripture says precisely the opposite. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. That was Jesus Christ's command. St. Paul tells us to obey governing authorities. So the Bible is very clear that we cannot simply discard the laws we don't like. As long as man's law does not contradict the laws of God, as long as we are not being told to do things that are inherently immoral and unjust and in contradiction to our faith, as long as that's not happening, then we are obliged to respect the law and follow it, even if we don't like it, even if it's inconvenient, even if it causes us hardship. The laws governing the border very much fall into the category of laws that we must follow as Christians. It's in fact the illegal aliens who are being unchristian in reality. And certainly all the people that are trying to facilitate their entry into the country. So if the left wants to bring our Christian faith into it, well, that's what our Christian faith actually says. So none of these tactics will work. None of this emotional blackmail from Congress, from the media, or anywhere else is likely to change very many people's mind about the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal aliens. Americans are fed up with the illegal conquest of our homeland. And we know that for every crying illegal alien they put on screen, there are 1,000 crying Americans that they could show whose lives were destroyed by the crime and drugs and violence that these people have brought into our country. But, they're not showing us those images. And this time around, in a major contrast from the first Trump administration, everyone knows why. And that is why Democrats who have descended into panic about Donald Trump's decision to enforce immigration law are today canceled. Hey, YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.